Good day, whatever time zone you find yourself in. We're going to get started, even though folks are still joining, as we have a lot of great content to go through in just an hour. I'm Christine Eibsinger, Senior Advisor at Catalyst Off-Grid Advisors. I'm pleased to welcome you to a presentation and discussion on the Access Insights Platform, or AIP. Catalyst Off-Grid Advisors is a boutique consultancy focused on helping its clients tackle the global energy access deficit. Through the Catalyst team's deep engagement with local off-grid enterprises, my colleagues realized that local last-mile practitioners could benefit from a business intelligence tool that was an easy-to-use channel to the multitude of data points out there. Catalyst knew that market data was out there on key factors that influence last mile service delivery, like mobile coverage, health and education facility siting, water sources, bank branch locations. But they also knew that it was fragmented and often unknown to or accessible by local last mile distributors and project developers. With a robust and super crazy analytical capability, the team developed AIP to digitalize and democratize existing market data and enable it to inform the strategy and operations of local, smaller companies, which is who Catalyst really cares about. AIP is an entry point to provide practitioners the ability to understand geospatial dimensions of key factors important to their business. It was inspired by and complements other data visualization and analytical platforms that are available to practitioners, and through these platforms would enable them to go further and deeper on data analysis. I was pretty excited when Ian Muir, who will give a demonstration shortly, walked me through AIP. I'm not one who usually digs into data visualizations or geospatial renderings, but I could see how the layering and visualization of different data sets could be beneficial to an entrepreneur or a project developer on where and who to focus their efforts. I hope you take away a similar excitement around AIP and its value proposition, and how it is one tool among many that will accelerate universal energy access and our collective SDG goals. I want to thank our AIP partners, FCDO and CDC, A2EI, SMAP, and give a big thanks to Power for All for hosting this co-session with Catalyst today. Over to you, Brian.
You're on mute, Brian.
Oh, there you go. We can't hear you. No, you're still on mute, perhaps? You knew all we would have at least one technical difficulty. Here we go. Over to you, Brian.
Yeah, hope I'm loud and clear. Good day, everyone. My name is Brian Kauma. I coordinate the Powering Agriculture campaign in Uganda. Power for All is honored to be part of and to moderate this launch event. Maybe a little bit more about us. Power for All is a global campaign that is campaigning to accelerate the end of energy poverty by scaling distributed renewable energy solutions. The campaign represents more than 300 businesses, finance and civil society organizations that are focused on decentralized renewables, including household and business solar, mini grids, and productive use appliances. We currently coordinate campaigns on Powering Jobs, which is examining the deployment of decentralized renewable solutions to create jobs. The Powering Health campaign, which is leveraging solar-powered technologies to electrify health facilities. And the Powering Agriculture campaign, which is advancing fiscal and policy support for productive use of energy to scale agriculture production and productivity so as to achieve food security. In Uganda, we're also coordinating the Utilities 2.0 project that seeks to integrate energy access approach of the decentralized utility company with that of the decentralized off-grid energy companies in a bid to achieve faster and more achievable, more affordable universal access to energy. This project is jointly implemented by Wanume, Energrow, East Africa Power, and equatorial power. With those few remarks, allow me to run you through the agenda of the day. So we're going to have welcome and introductions that are ongoing, and then I'll welcome Ian to take us through the AIP platform for Uganda with a few use cases. Then I'll open a panel session where we hear from our experienced panelists about the work that they're doing and how it relates to the AIP platform. Then we'll get a few questions from the audience. And after that, we'll close. So we've got 1 hour to have all this happen. That's why we need a few ground rules. Next. So the session is going to run for 1 hour, as said. So we're into it by about 15 minutes. All audience members are muted by default so that we can minimize interference. Please feel free to use the Zoom's question and answer box to submit your questions at any point during our session. And also we're recording this event because we'll be wanting to share the proceedings of the launch event with all of you after it's done. And I hope that by your silence, you consent to us recording the event. Thank you. So today, like I said, we've got a really great panel. I know these people personally, and the work that they do speaks for themselves. We've got Aaron Leopold, who's the CEO of Energrow, that are doing life-changing things in the renewable energy space in Uganda and the region. We've got Alex Wanume, who's the Uganda country director of Winch Energy. These are wonderful mini-grid developers, and we're going to hear more from what they do and how their work can benefit from the platform. Lastly, we've got Crystal Mugimba, who's the project leader, Open Capital Advisors. Crystal, Aaron, Alex, you're welcome. We're going to get deeper into what they do in the coming sessions. Allow me now to welcome Ian to take us through the AIP platform for Uganda and also demonstrate a few use cases. Over to you, Ian.
Okay, everyone, let me just get my screen sharing going and then we'll kick off here. Colleagues, I trust you can see my screen. Okay, so excited to walk you all through the Uganda module of the AIP today. As some of you know, we launched Kenya a few months back. I want to start by saying that our intention is to regularly update this platform as new data layers become available. So what you're seeing is just a start. And indeed, there are definitely some data gaps, and we hope that you provide feedback on what additional data sets you'd like to see included in the platform. Going forward, we hope to be just one of the many stakeholders encouraging the creation and publication of up-to-date, highly granular geodata to further support development of the last mile distribution sector in the country. So I'm going to go ahead and take you through the various layers we have for Uganda. I'll pause on some that I think are particularly interesting or novel and highlight how they could potentially be used by various stakeholders. So we always start with some administrative boundary layers. The reason I'm going to talk through them quickly is because a lot of the data we see today is going to be seen at a certain level of granularity. So Uganda has regions, which are quite coarse. It has subregions, which are less so, and where much of the data we show you today will be displayed. There's a district level breakdown, which is a very appealing from a highly granular perspective. And unfortunately, there's not all that much data available at a district level today, but hopefully that will change. And of course, there is towns, which can be used by the user to help get their bearings a little bit. So let's dig right into one of the most exciting sections, which is energy. We have this broken down in essentially four groups. Lighting, which is the primary source of lighting used by households. And as you can see here, there's about 8 different options. And the primary reason we see people being interested in this is for those that are working in the off-grid access space. So typically we've seen businesses target certain types of consumers when they're looking for what types of products to sell. So kerosene lanterns, currently still commonly used in Uganda and relatively high expensive source of primary lighting. And as such, we see a lot of off-grid solar companies using kerosene concentrations as a way of indicating where they should be moving into and selling their products. The Taduba is the most basic source of kerosene lantern. And as you can see, there are certain regions, sub-regions in Uganda where Taduba use is still extremely high. So we expect that a last mile distributor would start by focusing on some of those regions to begin with. One thing that's different between, say, Uganda and Kenya is that there's a fairly large amount of dry cell battery use, especially in the north of the country. This is great for the population because it's a relatively low cost of primary lighting, but it is relatively cheap. And this presents a new challenge for companies because it can be more difficult to convince them to purchase a new system. And I think in these areas, off-grid solar companies are likely to have to find other justifications and ways in which to sell products to consumers, be it television or some other form of productive activity. We have the same thing for cooking fuels, where you can see, for example, the percentage of charcoal users in an area. So whether you're a Burn or another company that's trying to sell improved charcoal stoves, or whether you're looking to convert people from charcoal to LPG or another source, obviously being able to identify where the largest number of existing charcoal users is significant given the cost of cooking with charcoal. On the grid electricity front, we have a pretty great layer that shows the transmission and distribution network in the country. And I think this layer, layered with many others, can be really valuable in terms of planning. I'm going to leave it up for that reason. We can see kind of that going forward. I'm going to skip ahead to mini grids. One thing that's quite novel with the platform is I think we're the first to have digitized the Uganda REA master plan's proposed mini grid sites. So I'll switch them on here, and you can see these are ones that have been identified as high potential by the REA in the 2019 exercise, but for the most part have not been built out yet. So something very interesting for the potential mini grid developers in the market. Okay, so moving ahead to institutions and services, as we always make an effort to do, we try and show the locations of financial services, the locations of health facilities, and the location of education facilities. The quality of this data can vary, unfortunately. A lot of it is often crowdsourced when the government itself has not got a strong repository that's publicly available. So in the case for financial services, these are crowdsourced locations. Going forward, we hope there'll be surveys that help increase the number of data points that we have and confirm their accuracy. The same applies for health facilities. Because of COVID and because of increasing interest in the electrification of health facilities, there are a lot more efforts being made to geolocalize health facilities. You can see here in Uganda, certain regions have very good coverage, others less so. This is one thing that we're definitely going to be focusing on going forward, and I'm interested in support from stakeholders on. On education facilities, this is one thing that I think gets short shrift relative to some of the other electrification efforts. And what's quite spectacular is when you switch on the schools layer here and see just how many schools there are in the country. And as ICT becomes more and more important as a learning tool, obviously getting these schools electrified in some way, whether it's by the grid or by some off-grid solar solution, is critical. And so this tool can obviously help identify opportunities there. Let's move to population demographics. So one shortcoming of the Uganda module so far is our population density layer is not yet up and running. I want to flip to Kenya just to show you what we are actually working on for Uganda. Kenya, we worked with Facebook, which has been doing a lot of algorithmic-based work to identify population density, amongst other things, in different markets. And it's incredible the level of detail you can get in a market. And this can be obviously used by last mile distributors to really target their sales, their surveying, their activities at a hyper localized level. So I'll zoom out just to show you kind of what level of detail we're talking about. There's Nairobi, and the country as a whole is just a sea of points. And this is where people actually live in Kenya. So we're working with Facebook to make this available for Uganda. It's so high resolution that it poses some challenges with the platform. That said, we do have some important demographic-based information. So for example, if you have a program that's looking to target children, you can, I'll zoom out here. You can use it to look for areas that are where there's particularly large concentrations of people under the age of 14. for example, here, or similarly for people of old age, over the age of 65, you can see where those areas are quite easily. On infrastructure, we always have a road layer, since we know that obviously for last mile distributors, being able to access sites is critical. And then one thing that's quite new for this platform is that we've licensed mobile coverage network maps. And so, for example, here you can switch to MTN and you can see kind of, this is an estimate of MTN coverage in Uganda. And so if you are selling a product that requires connectivity, whether it's for the customers to easily make payments or because there's a built-in chip to activate it, this can give you a guide as to where you might have some challenges going forward. It's indicative, but we'll do our best to keep this updated going forward with the help of Collins Bartholomew. On the health front, this is beyond the health facilities. We found some really interesting data sources that show things like people's access to hygiene, to toilets, or to clean drinking water. So increasingly large number of last mile distributors looking to offer improved hygiene solutions. So if you, for example, want to see where people that are still using really primitive toilet solutions, or ones that could still be upgraded, for example, like a pit latrine, you can switch on and you can see where those concentrations are. Similarly, for those that are looking to do water pumping, not for irrigation, but for public water consumption, you can see where people are farthest from water sources and therefore spending the most amount of time out of their day to collect water. Same goes here for this 3 to 5 kilometer layer. And then some of the most interesting news sources we found, sorry, I'm skipping ahead here, on the key indicators of economic health, being able to target areas where there's particularly high levels of poverty is obviously of great interest to those of us working in the development sector. And so we have a poverty incidence level here. This is P0, so the percentage of people living in poverty. We have information on average household incomes. And you can see where kind of the average wealthiest households versus the poorest are located, which can obviously help also with some business planning. And then unemployment rates. And so efforts that are being made to reduce unemployment, you can easily toggle these sliders here to see where unemployment rates are particularly high in the country. These 3 next ones, a lot of people will be familiar with. These are interesting roof, wall, and floor materials, in large part because these are used often as a proxy for a level of wealth, but also kind of as a way of determining creditworthiness. So seeing the percentage of people that are still using earth floors versus cement floors, market difference throughout the country. And we have the same breakdowns for roof and wall materials. And then now I'm on to one of my favorite sets of layers here, which is economic activity. And so we're particularly excited about the ag energy nexus in Uganda. And we're really grateful to have access to a fantastic set of survey data collected fairly recently by the Ugandan government. And that shows industry participation. So of course, there's a very large percentage of the population engaged in agriculture as a primary source of activity. But not only that, we can see a lot of information here about these agricultural households and key elements, regarding their success going forward. So what percentage of them are currently using irrigation? We have to look here at these percentages. Just 4 to 7% in this region here using irrigation. If you drop this area, you can see the levels that are using irrigation outside of kind of southern Uganda and Kampala area is really very, very low. So a huge opportunity there, clearly. Similarly on things like fertilizers, there's impressive fertilizer usage in the Southwest, but other than that, very, very little fertilizer usage elsewhere. Similar on improved seeds, relatively low usage, seeing here that the cap being displayed is just 33%. And then things on like access to credit. Let's flip that on here. So the max you see up here on the top is 26% average household access to credit. But in reality, the majority of households have significantly lower access to credit than that. That obviously hampers their ability to improve their agricultural performance. And so really love this layer and think there's a lot going on here that can be leveraged by various stakeholders. And then finally, we have a permanent crop growth layer. And this is very interesting, I think, from a productive use of energy perspective. Is looking through this list, you'll see that the majority of these crops have associated activities, processing activities that could be enabled through reliable access to electricity. So for example, on rice, you have the opportunity for husking. And you'll see as I flip through these, the different regions in Uganda that have different focus areas. So rice, as you can see here, is focused in just a handful of areas in the center. Millet, of course, has some opportunities. Maize, everyone knows well, is a big one from a milling perspective. On coffee, we have a split between Arabica and Robusta, but of course, there's coffee pulping that can be supported through electrification. And then we have some other, key ones like cassava, beans, and bananas. So really a lot of information to work with. And one of our principles of this is to be as expansive as possible and to try and think, well beyond even our core competency at Catalyst, which is energy, but expanding as far and widely as possible into the various last mile distribution sectors that are kind of popping up to improve development outcomes across the country and the continent. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to any questions that the audience might have later.
Yeah, this is really great, Ian. Thank you for that demonstration. And I know that the Ugandans in the house are really excited about this. I personally am. And I think the oversight was not having a government official at this launch event to really have added so much value, because this is some of the information that they keep looking for. I know you have so many questions, our participants, so please feel free to use the question and answer button to leave your questions there. We'll get to them shortly. The next item on the agenda is our panelists. And I know I've spoken about them before, but this is an opportunity for them to tell us who they are, what they do for Uganda, and how this platform is going to help drive their work and work of similar companies forward. So I will start with Aaron. Aaron, could you please tell us about yourself and your company, and what role do you play in Uganda's energy sector? You could also explain a bit about how data, or its absence, affects your work on a day-to-day basis, and how do you use it?
Of course.
Over to you.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, cheers. Thank you, everyone, and it's a real pleasure to be part of this this conversation. This is a really important platform for us, and to Brian's point, Energrow is a data-driven company. So what is Energrow? We are the first, and we think we're the only company right now on the continent that is focusing purely on helping drive demand for energy services by being a load growth partner for mini grid companies and national energy utilities across the continent. We're starting in Uganda in collaboration with Power for All and the Utilities 2.0 collaboration that Brian mentioned at the outset, together with Equatorial Power, the mini grid company, Wanume, the national utility, East Africa Power, and others. And what we basically do is we provide asset financing for productive use appliances. So I went from running the Africa Mini Grid Developers Association to selling refrigerators 3 months ago as I took over Energrow's leadership, and I'm very proud to be selling refrigerators, because that is what rural communities need to keep their Coca-Cola and their crops and their medicine and everything else cold in these areas that have been newly electrified or have been electrified a long time ago and have never had access to these appliances and tools. I think one of the interesting things that the data doesn't show, because no one's really tracking it, is what are the availabilities of such electrical appliances and productive use appliances in different regions. We've kind of joked along with the refrigerators that we are basically an electronics shop in the back of a pickup truck at Energrow, selling things on a microfinance basis. And this is really important, because if you're in a newly electrified area, why would there be an electronics store anywhere near you? There's no reason for these companies to be there. And even if you are within 20 or 30 kilometers from such a shop, you go into town and you're looking for something for your newly electrified house, but you don't know anything about the quality. You don't know anything about any warranties. You don't know anything about how well suited the tool is for your specific needs. So we at Energrow try to work with all the communities across Uganda to basically find out specifically what they are in need of that will help them earn an income through electricity. And we're very proud to say that the average income increase of our customers is just about 70%. And half of our customers want additional loans, and none of them could have afforded afforded the appliances and tools without our services. So I'm going to stop there because it's an introduction round, but the real value for us in this tool is really understanding the credit worthiness, the access to different types of services, credit services, education services, health services in these communities that can help us better select where to go when we're partnering with a national utility, but also so we can work with our mini-grid company partners to help them all understand as well, together with us, how we can collaborate to both electrify communities and then increase demand for those electricity services to help make all the energy companies that we work with more financially viable. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Aaron, for that introduction. Now let's move to Alex. Alex Wanume, tell us about Winch. Why should we be excited to learn about Winch's work, and how does this platform help to drive your work forward? Over to you, Alex.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Thank you, all the organizers of the event. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alex Wanume, Country Director of Winch Energy. First of all, Winch is a global mini-grid developer headquartered in the UK with branches around Sierra Leone, of course, Uganda, working in Ethiopia, and other countries of interest. So in our line of business, it's really data-centric activities that we are really working on. So data basically drives our development, our interest into going into new countries, and also when you are trying to expand, data is really a very important factor. And looking at what Ian presented, our main focus would really be on the ability to pay and the willingness to pay of the aspect of the mini-grid development. Willingness to pay basically means that the people who are looking to provide the mini-grid services for have the capability to pay for the electricity that is being produced. And also the willingness to pay means that the people are able to pay for this electricity. So we look at the different avenues that we are presented with, and we make those decisions. And not only in our decisions as well, but also when we are going for the funders as well, because funders find this information very important when they are looking to provide the funds for developing the project. So really, we shall go in detail later, but in a nutshell, that's what the data is important for our line of work. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Alex. Last but not least, let me welcome Crystal Mugimba of Open Capital Advisors. Please tell us about OCA, the work you do, and how this platform is going to help drive your work forward and also benefit Uganda and the region at large. Over to you, Crystal.
Sure, thanks, Brian. Hello, my name is Crystal Mugimba, as Brian called out. I'm a project leader at Open Capital. Open Capital is a management consulting firm focused on frontier markets across 22 sub-Saharan African countries. A lot of our work is to support high potential businesses, investors, and industry actors to develop scalable approaches for economic growth. Specifically, I work in our energy access practice, where we've developed a sort of understanding of the sector, specifically with distributed energy as well, working with a cross-section of off-grid businesses to grow and think about their strategy and launch. We've also worked with financial institutions, development partners, and DFIs to catalyze investment into the sector and improve the enabling environment. And we've launched a number of innovative programs to support the ecosystem. One of those being the Venture Builder Program in partnership with Catalyst Advisors, and also Uganda's off-grid market energy accelerator, where I was the technical lead for about 3 years as well. And specifically under that, and also with the breadth of all the work that we've done, we've also done a number of sector market research landmark pieces, including the 2020 off-grid solar market trends report with Gogla. So there are a number of pieces across all the work that we're doing that we do see data and democratizing data and making it available for all of us to inform a number of those pieces, especially because a lot of our work focuses on doing research or even strategizing and helping a number of those actors around things like distribution strategy, market research, fund structuring and market sizing, where a lot of this data pulls in and is quite useful. I'll pause there because I know this is the introduction piece, and I'm ready to kind of dive in when we get to the questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Crystal, and thank you for the rest of the panelists for those really lengthy introductions. I think the audience is starting to appreciate the work that you're doing in the region. Let's have some specific questions for the panelists now, and I'll start with Aaron. So Aaron, we know that Energrow has worked with so many companies, particularly the small businesses in tailoring, carpentry, welding, restaurants, and whatnot in the rural areas that investors and development organizations want to invest in, but have very little information about. Tell us a little bit more about the challenge of understanding these very small businesses, and how you can build trust between them and investors for energy access and productive assets. You could as well as tell us about the tools that you're using and how can data like this help. Over to you, Aaron.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, it's a complicated question. So one of the reasons why Energrow is needed is because, as Ian mentioned, less than 1/4 of the population of Uganda realistically has access to any form of credit. And I think the beauty of this tool is that when investors and even microfinance companies like Energrow are looking to better understand risk and the ability of a community or a region to represent financial viability as a customer base, we really need a lot of information about them. And I've said this often over the last couple of years that one of the reasons why the mini grid sector hasn't gotten a lot of investment is not because of the mini grid business model. If you put if you put a Winch mini grid in Mombasa or Kampala, it would make tons of money. And no one would really need, we wouldn't really be seeing the struggle that mini grids do see right now for investment if it was an urban mini grid problem that we were talking about. And that's one of the reasons why is we know so much about urban customers, because they're available, they're earning a bit more money, they're accessing all sorts of services, they have all sorts of digital footprints, etc. But rural Africans are often thought of as beneficiaries, and even when they are thought of as customers, they're very poorly understood as customers. How much savings do they have? How does different weather events affect their income? Where do they live vis-a-vis the nearest road or the nearest market or the nearest school or the nearest hospital? Most of that stuff investors have no idea about, and all of those things affect their creditworthiness as customers. So a lot of the challenge for raising capital in the energy sector is not about a lack of understanding of the companies, it's a lack of understanding of their customers and their ability for those customers to grow as the company builds its portfolio. And Energrow has the role of trying to help bring capital into these communities in a different way by bringing asset finance for productive uses. And so this data, for all the reasons that I just mentioned, is going to be extremely, extremely valuable in helping us, do credit scoring and help understand, how we can develop credit scoring tactics for these different communities. Right now, because most people that we work with don't have money or don't have assets that can be used as collateral, we don't take. And we use a combination of letters from local community leaders, and we do data tracking about their incomes to inform our credit check process. But now that we have this new tool, we'll be able to add layers to that credit checking process that will make it more robust, more transparent, and also more visible for our investors, which will be hugely beneficial.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Aaron. So Energrow is really changing things. I mean, there's no one size fits all. You've got to understand the customer, you've got to profile them, and then come up with creative ways of helping them access these energy solutions. I'm going to move to Alex from Winch. Alex, as an off-grid developer, focused on reaching remote areas as well. I think Winch has done a good job in leading the way on mini grids and other projects that are large enough to power entire rural communities and facilities like schools, factories, or hospitals. Tell us about your process for deciding where to launch new off-grid projects, what your considerations are, and what kinds of data you rely on. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Brian. Like I'd preempted a bit on the when I started the introduction, our main points that we look at are the willingness to pay and the ability to pay for the electricity that we're producing. So we are mainly looking at the socio-economic data when we are trying to make our decisions in where to put the mini grids. Socio-economic in the way that we want to get off-grid towns that are large enough to accommodate our mini grids, because like you say that we are trying to get into, we're in the business of providing power on a larger scale. So we are trying to get places where the towns, because the towns implies that there's a lot of demand. And also we are trying to get places where there's a bit of economic activity, because once you set up the mini grid, you want people to be able to afford the electricity through some sort of economic activity. So this is where now, even not on our side, but now a company like Energrow can come in, because if they have that data available, it will be easier for us to make partnerships with them and work together so that we can have a more productive mini grid that we have developed. So those are the main data sets that we look at, but also we look at things like distance from the grid, like you mentioned, which is one of the data sets that I've seen is provided under this, because you want to have an area which is off grid and you don't really want to run the risk of setting up a mini grid. And then maybe 2 years from now, 3 years from now, where you've been projecting 20 years of work, you're now being cut short. And one of the things that we do to alleviate this is work, of course, with the government. I've seen one of the queries has been whether we work with the government, such as Ministry of Energy, and the answer is yes. And this having this data set in one area like this platform will be really important in that regard. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Alex. So, like you've had willingness to pay, aggregate demand, economic activity, but as well as location, are some of the considerations that Winch Energy puts in mind when deploying their mini grids. Let me move on to Crystal. Crystal, could you please be kind enough to tell us, well, we've heard that Open Capital and your team really work with all kinds of companies. Yeah, you've talked about Venture Builder, which Catalyst was involved in. You talked about the Uganda Off-Grid Energy Market Accelerator, whose goal is to help off-grid companies get off the ground and provide universal energy access. Would like to hear more about your perspective working on initiatives like this on some of the biggest challenges that you see new Ugandan companies facing, and how data like those in AIP can help the companies overcome. Over to you, Crystal.
Thanks, Brian. And yeah, perhaps even to share a bit more context on as I called out, how we're working through a number of those programs, but even specific to Uganda with the Uganda Market Accelerator, working with the different categories of stakeholders, whether it's the businesses, investors, and DFIs and other market enablers, and also how we've been working with other players like the government and such, who you called out would be an interesting player to see a platform like this as well. A lot of our work in trying to accelerate the market has been in trying to understand what are the challenges, what is limiting scale. And what we saw, especially from inception, was that tension in information available and actually the realities on the ground. And what that gap has meant for businesses in trying to build their strategies, but what that has also meant for the public sector, whether it's government and other enablers in evolving policy and other programming to accelerate the market. And that gap in information has created sort of that tension and also a mismatch in value proposition, whether it's coming from the businesses themselves or even also from other market enablers, the programming that's available, the funding that's available, etc. I think from a public sector perspective, or even just from funds, DFIs and such, and programming, there's a lot of work that's trying to be done in sort of lobbying and planning to make sure that evolving policy is up to date and actually reflects the kind of information that's on the ground. And I think data like this helps to close that gap and also create a sort of synchronicity with information that is available from the private sector and also information that the public sector has. And creating that increases coordination, which we've seen is a big gap. Coordination in terms of planning, whether it's coming from the business side or also coming from the public sector, to make sure that those are working together and pushing the market. Then the second piece related to more specifically the question you asked me on businesses, and I think from a more granular level, especially when we're seeing the work that we're doing more specifically on strategy, is on market planning and market sizing and things like that. Data in understanding the regions and the opportunities that exist across those, whether it's also for how to evaluate and understand pricing and the value proposition. So data points like willingness to pay. And I think some of the interesting things that Ian was showing in terms of areas and target regions, those are all well suited in terms of how to better develop strategy and think through. And those also address that bigger question that I talked about in terms of mismatch, in the fact that planning does sometimes happen with data that's not accurate, and the consumer experience of things on the ground are completely different. So this better informs those sort of strategies. Does that fully answer your question? Is there any follow-up? Brian, you're still on mute.
Yeah, my apologies. Thanks a lot, Crystal. I think what you provide gives us a good perspective of the kind of solutions that this data will provide as far as addressing the challenges. I would like to ask the panelists, and feel free to go when you're ready. AIP is meant to be an ever-growing and evolving project that should be updated as new data becomes available. With that in mind, what kind of information is on your data set wish list? Yeah, where more or better data still needed? And are there any opportunities for companies like yours to feed data into a tool like AIP? So think about the question and feel free to start when you're ready.
I'm going to jump in just because I know Alex and Aaron probably have way more specific things to say about how it's going to support their business models. But I think one of the interesting things that we've seen is exactly as Ian was mapping it out, is that nexus with energy and other sectors, and that's extremely interesting for us. So looking at data sets on health facilities, looking at even some of the data that you're trying to pull together on mobile coverage, because it shows that nexus that exists with energy and healthcare, energy and ag, and then energy and digital financial services. And I think that's a lot of what's going to drive some of these energy business models, and also provide the best experience for consumers at the end in terms of how you're thinking about productive use and other impact. So I think those pieces of information are really interesting for us as we're supporting businesses and also support general funding thoughts, and also to further de-risk investment in some of these pieces. That kind of information is really interesting for us.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Crystal. Aaron, Alex?
Thanks, Brian. Alex, I see you've unmuted as well. I'll let you go first because I'm still trying to figure out exactly what mine should be. I've got a couple of ideas.
Yes, I'll just jump in. I think, Brian, the question you've asked is a really important one. in that if you look at the data sets that we would really want to maybe that can be included for us, I think of course, I say not try and be greedy and some I say, but of course the willingness to pay and the ability to pay sort of data is really helpful. In that this is what the funders are typically going to look at before they provide money for the project. So maybe banks or development partners that we have, like Aaron said previously, it's not really a lack of money or lack of interest in the rural activities. It is really lack of the data to connect with the rural areas, the people are in the rural areas. So if we can have more specific data, especially if we can have consultations with funders and see what kind of data they would really prefer, this would make the work of our work much easier. In that, just to give an example, when we are developing a project, we put in a lot of effort and time and money in trying to collect different sort of data that has to be verified again by the funders. So if this platform can become a one-stop center that can be trusted by the funders, this would make our work easier, just in a nutshell, in my opinion.
All right, thank you, Alex. Aaron?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I think for us, when we're looking at income generation opportunities through productive uses, the overwhelming majority of economic activity in rural Africa is agricultural. So better understanding where agricultural markets, market towns, market stalls, market sales operations on street sides, these types of things would be fascinating for us. Because even if you electrify a household, as we all know, people who work in Africa, a lot of food is sold in marketplaces that are unelectrified or on street side stalls, which are very far from poles and wires and electrification options. So half of Africa's food spoils due to wastage, and a lot of it doesn't. And then the other half that gets to market, or I'm sorry, that's after it gets to market, it's on the way to market. But once it gets to market, it's often has to be sold at rock bottom prices because of risk of spoilage. They have to sell it before it spoils. So farmers and then resellers get lower prices because of racing against time to sell things before they go rotten. And I think more information on the market chain, such as those marketplaces and linkages to larger towns, et cetera, the quality of the roads. I'm not sure if the road network on the AIP platform looks at whether they're concrete roads, so paved roads or dirt roads, or whether they are more like tracks rather than roads. These are all very, very important indicators to market access and the ability to deliver goods and services from rural communities into larger communities and vice versa to help get the economic cycle moving. Because just increasing a rural economy or rural communities' income in and of itself does not necessarily increase wealth. It's only through exchange with other markets that you start to see capital flowing into the community to help increase incomes more substantially.
Wonderful, thanks, Aaron. I want to just take a few questions from the Q&A from the participants. There's a question from Maya. I think, Ian, you might want to address this. In the population and demographic layer, are there any gender disaggregated data? Thanks. That's from Maya.
Yeah, super question. And we've been thinking about that more and more, how to integrate gender disaggregated layers into the platform. The good news is that, and it's part of the reason why we're having to work additionally with Facebook, is that in the latest iteration of their Facebook Data for Good initiative, that focusing on population density, they've actually disaggregated by not just gender, but also age groups. And so our intention is, once we've kind of fixed that handshake, to not have just a pure population density layer, but have ones that show population density for women, as well as women within certain age groups, and elderly people, because we think giving that level of breakdown and opportunity to the user just makes this even more powerful. And going forward, we're definitely hoping to see more and more of the kind of surveys released providing gender disaggregated data that we can integrate into the platform.
Yeah, Thank you, Ian. Another question from Joe Kirungi is around the refugee camps. I mean, you must be aware that there's a refugee situation in Uganda, people coming from different countries to settle, but also internal displacement of communities. So did this data collection process extend to these displaced communities?
Yeah, so I mean, we cast a very wide net when looking for relevant data for the platform. Unfortunately, we didn't come across existing data layers that would have been easy to integrate into the platform that would highlight those particular types of settlements. But I agree, going forward, having one that specifically highlights the locations of refugee and IDP camps to allow last mile distributors that are perhaps already operating in the region to make that realization and encourage them, in effect, to make outsized efforts to serve people living in those camps is extremely important. So if anyone on this panel has data that could help us do that, we'd very much appreciate it and be willing to collaborate with them.
Great. Thank you. Let me just get one last question, and then we can walk into the closing remarks. There's a question about the cost of transmission or distribution infrastructure, and how does the impact the unit cost versus gridded supply? How does this impact unit cost versus gridded supply? I think this was to the mini grid developer, Alex. Are there any subsidies probably from government to offset the cost?
Thank you for that. I tried to answer it, but let me just go into detail right now, because as a mini grid developer, like has been mentioned, we cater for everything from generation to the distribution and handling of the customer management, all in-house. So yes, there is a significant cost that is incurred in carrying out all this. However, the government and different development partners have come in and have put up a subsidy program. For example, in mini grids, if we are coming in as a private developer, you have they provide for you the distribution grid, which is really a very big help and assists a lot when it comes to lowering the unit cost of the electricity. And then for these larger projects, for example, the GIZ project, the 25 sites we are doing in Lamu region in the north and also in the south, the government provides the land, the distribution grid, and then they provide the connections, then also provide the generation subsidy. And this also helps in lowering the cost of the tariff per unit also. So the answer is yes, there are subsidies. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Alex. So our dear participants, we're running short of time. I think we've got 5 minutes on the clock for now. Allow me to ask our dear panelists to give us some parting shots. Let me start with Crystal.
Yeah, I think generally I'm really excited to dig into this and I appreciate all the great work that's gone into this. I think there's, as you called out, there's a lot of room for partnership and for us to all collaborate and share more data here. I think a big piece for us is that coordination piece is really key in making sure that we're all speaking the same language, have the same stats. To ensure that that's happening across the ecosystem. I think there's a lot of opportunity to even increase more capital flows and things like that coming into the market because of more accurate information, and that's really interesting and helpful for us. So I appreciate the team from Catalyst for inviting us to this and also showcasing this platform.
I guess I can go next because I think Brian is muted. Just to add on Alex's response on the distribution transmission, this data set is really important because we hope, I hope, as a former CEO of AMDA, that this is really going to help national utilities better understand their own grid expansion plans and where it makes most sense to have mini grids versus the main grid, and where we can really sort of use the best tool to fit the problem of rural electrification rather than the traditional tool, which has always been the grid. So yeah, I'm really excited as an energy sector player in general, and as Energrow, which I mentioned is a data-driven company. I think this information is fascinating. And as Crystal said, I'm really excited about digging in more deeply with my team and with other sector players to figure out how we can use this to help decrease rural electrification costs and increase the speed of that same process. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Alex?
All I can say is that a platform like this would be really the best option for us as a mini grid developer, because it really brings a lot of data that we need when carrying out our decisions, and also when for governments when they're carrying out their decisions, it really brings it out. And maybe the only point I would add is that it would be good if it's brought. I know it's going to be launched to almost all players of different industries, so that it can be used centrally, and also having interactions with the funders so that you can see what is needed on their side, so that it can become more of the one-stop center for all different sector players. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, as we close, please allow me to thank our partners, those that have sponsored this launch: Catalyst, Power for All, SMAP, to mention but a few. But also most in a special way, allow me to thank our panelists: Aaron, Energrow, Alex from Winch, and Crystal from Open Capital Advisors. The discussion is ongoing, and we have so many questions in the Q&A button that we'll reach out and answer, because we have all your contacts. So thank you, our dear participants, for staying locked for one whole hour. And we hope that the discussion that we had today was very useful to all of you. Thank you and have a great evening. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.